Right. Okay. So should we start? Nishant, you're on mute.
Yeah, so it's there on YouTube as well.
So should we start?
Yeah, we can start now.
You have to put the streaming off. I can hear myself there.
Sorry?
Nishant, you're on mute.
No, I've unmuted myself. They're on YouTube as well.
So should we start?
Yeah, we can start now. Okay, wait.
You have to put the streaming off.
Yeah,
I can hear myself there.
Fine now?
Yes. Okay, so I think we'll just start with the question first, as always. You can just project the PPT.
While we are waiting for others to join.
Yes, so all the participants here, hello and a very, very warm welcome. We'll start this meeting by hearing your views on this question. So the question that we've shortlisted for today is, what is the main concern that you have faced in your residential space during the lockdown? And we would request all of you to please start writing your questions in the chat box so that we can understand the kind of challenges that our audience has faced, and we can take up those points specifically during the presentation. So if you could just please write your messages on the chat box, we can read them out. Please write on the chat box your answers to these questions which are on the screen.
आंसर दीजिए, आपको अपने घर में लॉकडाउन में क्या दिक्कतें आई?
I'm getting a question. It says free and open space. Okay. So this is from Mr. Keshav Gupta. He thinks that one of the biggest challenges that they have faced or concerns that they have faced is free and open space. I think we are going to touch upon it today in our presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's very important. I mean, I think 2 months of lockdown and all of us are yearning for free and open space. So definitely, this is very important, and it also points a lot to how, I mean, we've all in these 2 months, I think we've all started seeing our residential spaces differently. From just places where we used to reside, they're now, you know, lot more. They are workspaces, they are study areas. They're pretty much our, you know, our entire life for the entire day. Yes.
Ajit Chandran says not able to do regular walk outside in the sun.
Yeah.
So again, I think hinting at the limitations of the free and open space.
Absolutely.
Inside.
Yeah, again, I mean, similar, everyone's schedule is, you know, disrupted, and we're all trying to come to grips that how does our residential space, you know, respond to you know, the challenges that we're all facing by this lockdown or in future, you know, because the vaccine is nowhere in sight, and we may have to continue with this changed lifestyle for a lot longer. So, yeah.
So, of course, I think in terms of feeling or emotion, I think one definitely, the word lockdown itself evokes that emotion that you are locked. If by choice, if you were to be staying inside for a week and you really didn't feel like meeting anyone, I don't think that it would evoke the same emotion.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other concerns people may have felt while staying and working from home, or even bringing stuff home and stuff like that. It'd be really nice to hear your views on this question. While we wait for others to join, it'll be good. Okay, another one. We somehow need to make arrangements as to make our spaces private, yet being social. Yes.
Very important.
Yeah, Nishant.
Yeah, I mean, we'll touch upon this aspect in the presentation, and this is very pertinent in today's day and age because probably the divide between the personal space and the public space in the house has just gone a bit wider. So, everyone's talking about it, all designers. I mean, in our team, we are very conscious when we are designing residences as to how we are managing the public, the semi-public, and the private space of a house because uh, you know and you have to build in flexibility because there is so many different users that a residence will go through now, especially now when people have started working from home, kids have started studying from home. So flexibility, able to mold and adapt your space such that the public and private space is sort of segregated, and yet the entire functioning of the house is retained, is going to be a very key factor. Right. Manu, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. So the next point is the biggest challenge will be to ensure safety and taking precautions from visitors and home deliveries.
Yeah, very important. I mean, it's yes, I mean, it's absolutely true. Home delivery, whether it may be of food or courier or Amazon or anything, is ultimately a source or a potential source of contamination coming into the house. And uh, we'll be talking about in detail in the presentation, but creating these thresholds that actually manage to sort of keep the contaminants, if any potential contaminant is there, you manage to keep it outside your residential space. So it's going to be a very, very important aspect. Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of people joining in. Manu, you want to wait for another couple of minutes before we start? It's 07 right now, so let's start at 4:10.
Yeah, I think we should start now. So
We can start now, or do you want to wait for a couple of minutes?
I think we can start.
Okay. Okay.
So I'll first read out a little introduction.
Yeah.
Right. Hello and welcome everyone to the webinar series hosted by Novak. We are an architecture, engineering and planning firm with a multidisciplinary team of experts. Today, I extend a warm welcome to you at the 5th session in the series of designing healthy buildings post-COVID hosted by our firm. And today's session is about redefining residential spaces post-COVID. A famous quote says, home should be an anchor, a port in a storm, a refuge, a happy place in which to dwell. As an architect, designing this refuge post-COVID is surely going to gain a new perspective. During this period, while we were ourselves working from, we felt the pulse of these changing needs, initiated several discussions within the team, and the adaptation strategies. In today's presentation, we will be discussing the various physical, spatial, and emotional aspects pertaining to residential architecture, along with some very easy to implement simple solutions that all of us here can implement right away. We hope to offer some solutions to our participants as well as initiate a participative dialogue and deliberation on this subject. So we request everyone to please keep flooding their comments, observations, questions on the chat box. The presentation will be done by my colleague Nishant Goyal, who is an architect, urban designer, and a smart city expert. He is also a lead accredited professional and a Griha evaluator with a keen eye towards implementing sustainability in projects. Request Nishant to start the presentation now.
Great. Thank you, Manu, for the introduction, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joined in. So residential spaces, I'm sure, I mean, we've seen the chat box get flooded with so many, opinions and issues that people are facing during this lockdown. But what is the main crux of things, and how will our residences respond to this lifestyle change post COVID? Where staying indoors, working from home, studying from home has become the new normal. So our team has brainstormed, and we are going to be using a lot of our projects as case studies to explain certain changes that you can bring to your residence, some quick changes that you can bring to your residence in order to get yourself to be COVID ready now that the lockdown is gradually easing out. The three main categories that we have looked at. The first is, of course, safety and security. Someone touched upon it in the question as well, where we think creating thresholds, disinfection zones, and some storage areas will be a key factor. Then, of course, there's the new hygiene, where the house is now a workspace, it's a study area, and how do we actually equip our house to actually work from home? And then there might be certain types of equipments that we're all looking at, maybe changing or adding to our household. So we'll showcase a few very simple equipments. And then flexibility. How do you actually get flexibility into your space? Um, and then healthy spaces, neighborhood culture. We've all grown up as architects, and people living in residential societies will tell you about the strong neighborhood culture, and that's what attracts people to living in group housings and colonies. But in the last 2 months, we've hardly even spoken to our neighbor, and if this continues for a longer time, what happens to these values of neighborhood culture that we are so fond of and we've grown up with? And then, of course, the important factors of indoor air quality, food self-sufficiency, as well as energy efficiency in our residential space. So we'll start with the first topic, which is the safety and security. And thresholds are very important now, because suddenly the public and private domain has become very, very stark. And we are all looking at potential contaminants that could come inside the house. So creating thresholds, creating barriers between outdoors and indoors, so that we have like a sanitization zone in between, a disinfection buffer in the middle, so that even if there is a contaminant which is come to the threshold, it doesn't penetrate deep into the house. And so we're going to show you some case studies about the projects that we are currently designing, and how we are implementing these thresholds. This is a typical house in NCR, the stilt plus 4-floor apartment. And you'll see in the sketch in the middle where, before the staircase and the lift lobby, we've actually created a threshold zone now. And in this threshold zone helps us to have sanitization as well as disinfection of anyone entering the campus, whether it is the house owners themselves, their guests, or a delivery boy or a servant. So this is like the entry point of the house where we are creating these thresholds. And then inside the house as well, when you enter in, there has to be an entrance lobby which now doubles up as a sanitization buffer zone. And ideally it should be connected to a washroom, because any vegetable, any item that you bring from outside would need to be washed in soap water or sanitized, etc., etc. And if you have a room next to it, even better, because then that room can have a very flexible dual purpose, of actually having an additional, or the storage there being devoted to just keeping goods for a certain amount of time before you take them deep inside your house. And we'll see other flexible uses of this sort of guest room space, that, so to say, that is there in a lot of residences. But creating thresholds extremely important. This is an example of a residence, an independent bungalow style residence that we are designing. Again, similar principles. So what we've done is we've charted out the movement between the guests and the house owners, and the help, and the maids and the help, and other people that come in to service the house. So if you see, again, creating thresholds at the main entry and having a drawing room which is away from the private spaces. It's connected to the threshold space, but it's away from the private space. So that even when you're entertaining guests after the lockdown finishes, or you have to invite people over, you are keeping them in a safe, secure zone so that it's away from your private space. And then again, the maids and the various helps, domestic helps that come in, or the vegetables, etc., they have a threshold right outside the kitchen because their movement is primarily to the kitchen. And then creating sanitization areas and making sure that regular sanitization is part of our lifestyle now. This third example is from a group housing project that we've done. So again, typically in group housing projects, you would have a common lobby where the lift, etc., would sort of reach, and then you normally have two entries. One is the entry to the main house where you should have a buffer, again a sanitization buffer, and then there's a second entry which normally is through the servant room, and it leads you to the kitchen through a service balcony. And this service balcony actually is now what we are saying will become the the wash and the buffer zone where all your vegetables, etc., can be stored for a little while. They can be washed thoroughly, any material that comes into the house. Also, please, it's very important that in all these buffers, please have good shoe racks in place so that you don't bring the shoes inside your house any longer, whether it's a domestic help, whether it's any guest, whether it's you yourself. uh, Footwear and all footwear, etc., need to be shielded and kept in the sanitization buffer space outside. And then disinfection. I mean, there are a lot of kits available, these battery operated small kits where you can actually sanitize your space yourself. So as soon as your maid finishes mopping and sweeping, you can just have a round of simple sanitization done in the house. You could have UV boxes for goods that come from outside. You can have a little space with the UV hammer light there and keep it for 30 to 45 minutes. And all techniques related to disinfection. The next point is isolation rooms. So we showed you the guest bedroom, and each house has to plan that if tomorrow someone is contaminated or is feeling ill and wants to get into self isolation, then what is the protocol going to be in the house? So and the person should feel safe, secure, and happy while they are self isolating. So he would need television, he would need study table, he would need access to fresh air, natural light, an attached washroom probably. So all these things have to be taken care of, and um, the way you arrange your house should be such that in an emergency you have a nice isolation space available. It could be a flexible space, it could be a space that is converted at that time, but it's extremely important to think about it and plan in advance. Then the second main point is the hygiene, and how do we actually adapt our house to the new hygiene? And for a residence, I feel one of the biggest challenges is that suddenly my house is also my office, it's my workplace, it's my school. So if there's a typical family of two adults and two children, you actually now need four working desks. And not just working desks, you need soundproof areas because your kids would be attending online classes. You and your wife would be having their own work schedules and your work calls. So suddenly, from a house where you maybe had one study desk for someone to work on if they were if in an emergency, you now have four working desks, and suddenly the sitting posture and the way you work becomes very important because if we start working from the sofa or a beanbag all the time, then we are going to be prone to backaches and other problems. So carefully designing the workspace within the house is going to be the new normal, and it should have natural light ventilation, have uh, proper seating arrangement, proper data, Wi-Fi connectivity, and if required, a soundproof space for us to do our calls. So again, some examples, and if, as you can see, we have started putting in a lot of studies now in our designs. So this is a project which we have just sort of recalibrated once the lockdown started, and And now we've got two studies on this, on two formal soundproof study zones in the layout. One of them, of course, is like a flexible space which can be made into a study as required, or can be part of the living room. And then each of the bedrooms has a study table which has been designed, and electricals have gone in for that and things like that. So studies are going to be very, very important as we now look at our residential spaces. Oops. Why is it not going? Okay. Yeah, another concept is a clo office, which is basically a closet, which is a study. So if you're working from your bedroom or from a living room, you can actually just convert one of the cupboards in your house into a study, and let that be like a shuttered space, so that when you leave your desk, your computer, your papers, your files, they're not prone to be mismanaged, or if you have small children, children could just take one of an important paper of yours that you could be working on. So a clo office is a very simple way of just incorporating a study, which is lockable, which is safe, and which helps you do your work. Then we come to certain equipment. So what is the new hygiene? What are the new equipments that we're talking about? So certainly when you look at the layout, the main entrance doors, everyone should start thinking about a touchless entrance system at the main entrance door, because that is prone to a lot of external handling. And then if you are building a house, or if you're buying furniture, then all companies have come out with antiviral coatings on their laminates, etc. So you can now get your tables, your anything can be built with antiviral laminates or surfaces. Copper is an example. Then sanitizers, touchless sanitizing dispensers should be there, especially in kitchen and other areas frequented by domestic helps. And you can have simple attachments like the top of the screen, which can be put in the internal door, so that your maids, etc., can start using their arms to open the door rather than your hands. So simple equipments that can go in. um, Right. Now for the kitchens, first, it's very important to, I mean, I'm sure everyone has already implemented it, but uh, get your, make it a habit that before and after every meal, all the surfaces in the kitchen are disinfected through careful wiping. You can go in for touchless taps, touchless sanitizers there. Uh, Fruit washing or vegetable washing equipment. And now you also have the UVC, the UV light sanitizers, which look like a microwave, but that can be put so that if your vegetables or things that come from outside, they can be sort of put inside that sanitizer for a little while and be disinfected. Right, then flexible spaces. So typically in all households we have a large family living dining sort of a space, and with the new requirement for studies or maybe isolation rooms in future, it may be time that we start looking at and implementing very simple flexible partition systems. I think Keshav has joined the session. His company is doing metal curtains which can be easily sort of installed to create divisions in a space. And you have all hardware companies are giving us very good examples or options for flexible partition systems that can easily make your living space into a study as and when required, or into another space as and when required. And then if you're buying furniture, think about it carefully, because now this is a slide which shows some amount of play area inbuilt into the partition that has been created in the house. Because just like us, people were talking about morning walks not happening. Imagine the kids. I mean, they were used to going to school, playing with their friends, going to the neighborhood park in the evenings, playing for an hour and a half, and they've been holed up inside the house for 2 months now. So maybe it's a good idea that when you start, if you're planning on installing new partitions or new furniture, think about a fun element. Maybe we can incorporate some fun element into the furniture for the kids. And of course, studies and storages, Then if you're buying something from your for a bedroom, maybe a study desk can be incorporated with the furniture that you're buying, and that can go a long way. Now I come to the healthy spaces part of it, and this is extremely important because and this idea of neighborhood culture. We all prefer living in either a residential society or a group housing because it offers us safety, security, but it also offers us a neighborhood. It offers us people whom we connect with, whom we feel safe with, whom we can interact with. It offers us going down to the park for a jog or a walk and meeting people and making friends in general. So unfortunately, with this pandemic coming, we've all just been living inside our houses, inside our own shells with our immediate family. And if things continue like this, we'll gradually start getting detached from our neighborhood, and that would be a very sad case of affairs. So in our projects, we are sort of bringing in this sensibility of designing socially distanced community spaces. Now, what are these socially distanced community spaces? They are spaces that promote community interaction, but they keep the social distancing and other hygiene norms in mind. Um, and it's very important for us to keep the sense of belonging, care, and empathy towards our neighbors intact so that we remain conscious individuals. Um, I'll just take you back to how our ancestral homes were planned. And if you see, we all have grown up in courtyard homes, probably, or at least our parents would have grown up in courtyard homes. And it used to always be a joint family. So it was like 5, 6 families living together in a house with a central courtyard. And the veranda and the courtyard gave that opportunity for physical interaction with everyone else. We all had thresholds in old houses with a little buttock, much like the drawing room or the study that we have nowadays, where the public movement was restricted. Or we had patios and verandas where we could speak with our neighbor, we could connect to the person outside, and yet be in the safety and comfort of our own house. And these, if you start looking at these principles, then suddenly the balconies become very, very important. Bring play in the balconies, especially in new buildings that we're designing. We are looking at balconies very, very very, very carefully now, and making larger balconies so that people can sit and interact. You could actually interact with your neighbor over a cup of coffee while maintaining the new hygiene. So balconies and patios, verandas are extremely important, the semi-covered spaces of the house. The other aspect that we are implementing is something which we call virtual meeting rooms. So in the last webinar, we talked about creating these smart IoT platforms for the new smart campuses that we're doing. And this platform actually gives us an opportunity to create virtual meeting rooms. So just like we are having this virtual meeting now, what if all our group housing societies, they have about a 2-hour window in the morning and a 2-hour window in the evening, which is a virtual meeting room. So anyone can just log in from that society and interact with people who are already there. So at least there will be some physical or some interaction with our neighbors. We'll talk about things, we'll discuss things. And, it's a great way to actually catch up and still feel part of the neighborhood. And then, of course, the open spaces in a housing, they will undergo a bit of change. The benches will no longer be the same. You'll either remove the central part of the bench, or you'll start installing individual benches. Even the parks will have either hedges to ensure that people are walking at a safe distance from each other, or markings, so that we are all sort of, while we are physically together in the space, we are still socially distanced. The next point is now about the air quality and the ambience of our space. And a house has to be a healthy space to live in and work in, especially if you're going to spend a lot more time in the space. So let people connect with nature. We are incorporating a lot of greenery and natural sort of vistas in our projects to ensure that people connect with nature. And then the indoor air quality. I mean, of course, your air conditioning systems and etc. we'll come to in the next slide. But you can actually start installing indoor air quality plants. It's simple plants that actually help purify the indoor air and make it better. Currently, the situation is good. We are all, I mean, the environment is much better than what it used to be. But but our environment will actually has a lot of pollutants in it, and these plants are a very simple way of of not only cleaning the air but improving the air quality, especially now that biocontaminants have been added to the other forms of existing pollutants that are there in the air. And then your air conditioning. Mostly people use window ACs or split ACs. Now, the biggest problem with windows and split ACs is that they only recirculate the air within the room. They do not take fresh air from outside. So ISHRA's come out with a lot of guidelines, simple guidelines that will help you get better ventilation and fresher air quality in your space. They've talked about, even if you're just using your window or split ACs, please use it with your windows partially open for a little while so that you get fresh air into your space. Then if you're using a central air conditioning system, we must have at least MERV 14 filters installed in our central air conditioning system. Make sure that you are cleaning your air filters in your machine regularly. And temperature settings, we've all heard, should be around 24 degrees, relative humidity 40 to 70%. And in residences, we use a lot of evaporative coolers. So we have to make sure that evaporative coolers are bringing fresh air inside, and they're not placed inside the space. They're placed outside and bringing the air in with better filters in there. And of course, the fans, the ceiling fans and the exhaust fans, they're extremely important because they help churn the air, bring in air circulation inside the house. The slide on the right is very interesting. I mean, the blue dot here is the coronavirus, which is actually 0.1 micron. And if you compare it with this blob here, the red blob, that's the size of our red blood cell. And then this is PM 2.5 and PM 10. So we are actually dealing with a very, very minute biocontaminant. And, filtration and fresh air intake is extremely important to keep our indoor air healthy. Right. And then it's about self-sufficiency. We all love greenery inside the house, but so let's move away from decorative plants. Let's start putting in food plants. Urban farming is the need of the hour. Let's try and become self-sufficient. The images on the right are from a project of ours where we've actually just used about 600 square feet of space for a kitchen garden, and it's now giving enough vegetables to feed a family of 4, and they are completely self-sufficient in terms of food. So not only are they getting healthy food, which is pesticide free and contamination free, but they're also reducing the chance of bringing external contamination into their house because the vegetables are all homegrown. You can club that by growing some medicinal plants as well. And then finally, our energy efficiency. So we can all, once the lockdown opens, we can all start installing solar panels so that we create a bit of energy ourselves. And water, at least the kitchen waste, can be easily reused through a simple reed bed system or simple recycling system. Please ensure that you are recharging the rainwater or reusing it. If you're living in a housing society, maybe it's time that you start in your RWA, start talking about installing garbage chutes, because garbage is a very potent mechanism for transferring contamination. And if we start doing, if we retain the physical way of handling waste, then it just increases the chance of contamination spreading. So waste management is a very key aspect that we should think about, talk about, and there are a lot of simple techniques which can be executed. So that's a brief presentation from me. And like we always say, let's drive the change. Let's start thinking. Let's start discussing about these things. Spread the word so that we make our residential spaces healthy and safe. So thank you so much. Manu, you can take over.
Thank you, Nishant. A wonderful presentation. I loved watching it. I would request everybody to please post their questions or queries in the chat box. There are a few observations which I'll start reading out now. You can catch your breath, Nishant.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
good.
So, yeah, I'll just start taking them from the beginning. Okay. Right. So it says one of the most important things, are we even ready to accept the reality? If you see things in the past few days, most people are more likely to accept the new status quo. I would totally agree with that. In fact, in the first few sessions, the session would be that is this here to stay in the first place? Like, why are we talking about such detailed measures? Should we be investing into these kind of changes? Should we be taking it that seriously? And yes, I agree that the entire mindset of our own selves has changed. So this is one observation. Then Chandran has written, as most of our support staff was from outside, a couple of days of disruption happened. Lockdown was enforced in nearby villages, especially waste. You can, Nishant, talk about this external factors. So I think here Ajit is talking about a disruption from outside. Let's say the waste management at the community level is disrupted due to lockdown or due to some reason or the other. Would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great observation, Ajit, because we are so dependent on support staff of for our in our houses and in our residences, that the lockdown has forced a lot of lifestyle changes as well. And waste management is a key thing, because suddenly if you don't have the waste collector coming to your doorstep every day, then what happens to the waste? And in houses, I think we all need to start segregating waste. And you'll be surprised that once you start segregating your waste, you can actually cut down your waste generation by more than 50-60%, because your kitchen waste can easily go to a simple composter that you can keep in your house. Your and then once you have your plastic waste separate, the plastic waste can be reused, the glass bottles can be reused. And it's just the microfilm, the polythene which have the plastic which has the coated film, which actually needs to be sent to the recycling plant or to your waste collector. So please start uh, segregating waste as soon as it's generated, and making sure that your dry and wet waste is separated. And you will find that there will be a lot of solutions that will start popping up, which you can implement and actually reduce waste which you generate from your household.
Right. The next question from Alok Goyalji is the isolation room suggested in each flat or house, or in multi-stories they can be on the ground floor?
Okay, so again, interesting question. So you see, there are different types of housing that we're all inhabiting. In the previous presentations where we've talked about smart campuses, smart housing campuses, we've talked about creating central isolation zones. But if you're living in an independent house, or if you're living in, let's say, a typical STIT plus 4 floor apartment building in NCR, then you have to think about it inside your own apartment. And you don't sort of have to designate an isolation room inside your house and let it occupy that space all the time. But there could be flexible solutions that you can implement, or a guest room could become an isolation room when required, so that you have the right furniture, etc., to enable it if the situation arises. So it's important to start thinking about it, because if a family member gets contaminated and has to self isolate, then there should be a healthy space for him to occupy and recuperate.
Right. There is a question regarding even the single seater does not fully prevent the person from the virus. How to tackle that, as the virus can also remain on the surface?
Yes. So it's sanitizing. I mean, um, just like you know, just like we carry our wallets, we'll have to carry our sanitizers with us, at least till the pandemic is sort of so prevalent until it dies down a bit. But carrying sanitizers is going to be extremely important. So if you are using any public space, you will have to get into the habit of sanitizing it before using.
Right. The next question says, will open planning of the living space make it more susceptible to the spread of the virus?
Not really. We showed it in the layouts. As long as you have a threshold to control external contaminant. So thresholds are extremely important. Create a threshold, make sure that everything that comes from outside is kept in that threshold space, duly sanitized. If you have a UV equipment, then you can put it under UV light, or at least have a washroom next to it where you can wash it in soap water, etc. So you're living, by the time anything comes in your living space, it's already disinfected. And residences are very different from an office or a factory or other commercial spaces. You see, in a residence, it's only a family staying together. So it could be 4 people, 6 people, 8 people, 3 people, 2 people, whatever. But those people are staying in the house together. So they are obviously going to interact. I mean, there is going to be physical interaction between people in the family. So a living space need not be a hindrance. In fact, it's a great opportunity for you to use it as a flexible space. Like the slide showed, you could have, like metal curtains, you could have sliding partitions, which actually partition the space when required into different activity zones.
Right. Fantastic. Urvashi Sabuji is asking, how do we ensure sanitization of incoming goods in DDA flats where there's a common staircase and the main door of the house opens straight into the sitting room?
Yeah. So we showed you examples of how we're doing it. One very good way of doing it is that if there are, let's say, 12 people or 10 families living who are accessing that staircase, they actually create a temporary threshold space at the beginning of the staircase. The other way to do it is that you can actually just create a little space at your own doorstep. So whether it's just outside the door or just inside the door, if you can create a temporary, it could just be through curtains also. If you could create a little space, maybe 1.2 meters by 4 feet by 4 feet or 5 feet by 5 feet, where you keep anything that comes from outside is kept there, sanitized, left there for a little while, and then brought inside the house. And that could be enough, for creating a threshold. For residential spaces, very simple thresholds are more than sufficient.
Right. And I think, Nishant, we should also talk about the identifying the wet point, the first wet point, which is closest to your main entry. So I remember having this discussion with our team where what we were, this is just my 2 bits on this, that we all tend to have one washroom or the other, whichever washroom is closest to the entrance, and you can stop using the WC in that particular washroom, clean it, sanitize it, and convert that into a sanitization chamber. So whatever stuff that comes inside the house and the people who are coming to the house can first go to that transition zone. They can wash their feet, wash their hands. The stuff that is brought in is like all of those protocols that Nishant is saying. So I think this is one thing that everybody can implement. And if the wet point is not there, then you can create a wet point. You can even put like a small water dispenser, like the way we have the 5 liter or 10 liter can of water, and you can keep a tub below and create a wet point there. So these are some things which are very, very implementable in any kind of a household. Okay. On how many levels a threshold needs to be created in a group housing?
So group housing, actually, I would say three levels. So one is, of course, the main entrance, the guard room area, and there needs to be a threshold there. We talked about those things in previous webinars as well. You have vehicle sanitizers also available. You have simple sort of tire cleaners available. You can have, if there is a delivery boy or someone on foot entering, then there could be a little sanitization zone through which they pass. So that's the first level. The second one is the lobby space on the ground floor. which is the entry point to your specific building. So every time someone goes in and out of your tower, they are passing through that lobby space, and that is the second threshold. It's very important to ensure that there is a sanitization station there, and a simple threshold. Um, and then the third and final threshold is right at the entry of your door. So there are going to be three hierarchies of thresholds in group housing societies.
Great. There is a question from Mr. VB Mohan. It says, do you think small business owners would be shifting offices from an office complex to their basements if they're making a new house?
Interesting. I don't know if I mean, of course, professionals have always been working from basements, and because their enterprises tend to be smaller. But if you are an MSME, if you're in the manufacturing business, etc., then you probably cannot shift it in the basement. Bylaws don't allow you. But yes, if you are a professional, then basements could be thought of. But it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. If your house and your office are close by, if you are not commuting very very far distances to get to your workplace from your house, then it's one and the same thing. Because you're going to get out of your house, you're going to sit in your car and reach the office, and then it's just same. It's just same as being in the basement or being in your own little office, as long as you've taken the necessary precautions. So I don't think everyone will be able to come and start operating from residential areas, and bylaws don't permit it, and they're not going to permit it in the future. I'm sure about that. But you see, just simple precautions of thresholds, managing things, making sure that your spaces are healthy, you're looking after the new hygiene, can actually make you COVID ready. And it doesn't really matter whether you're working from home or you're having to commute a little to get to your workplace.
Right. So if I just break this down, this question down further, I think he may be hinting at the peripheral spaces of the house, because I think they are looking at basement as a basement or a terrace or an out room or a room which is entered from the outside separately and stuff. So it's basically the peripheral areas of the house that they may be hinting at. And yes, I think there will be an upswing in people looking at creating an additional workspace, not necessarily as part of within the house or converting one of the bedrooms into offices, but maybe trying to create and this is specifically talking about new residences. So I think there will be some perspective shift there.
Yeah, I mean there will be. I mean a lot of people who are self-employed or they don't have a large team working for them. They can easily convert their houses into their workplaces. But even otherwise, I think video conferencing, doing sessions like this, virtual meetings is going to be the new norm. And kids attending online school is going to be the new norm. So ultimately you have to have good workspaces in your house, and any space that you have additional, like Manu uses the word peripheral space, should be utilized efficiently. Just like you don't leave even a single inch of space in your office as unutilized, similarly in your residence, if it's a balcony, if it's a terrace, or any other space, a service area, ensure that you're making the most use of it on the parameters that we've talked about. Make sure that each space is contributing to a healthy lifestyle in the house. And once you start thinking about things under this paradigm, there'll be a lot of options that open up. So yes, I mean each space is going to be very important.
Right. The next question is from Mr. Keshav again. It says, do you think disinfection area needs to be airtight?
Yes and no. If it's airtight, it's obviously better if it's sort of got a double door there. But even if it's not airtight and if it just has a little screen to shield that area, that's absolutely fine. Because the you can do simple things like just install a little you know like Manu talked about. You can have a little powder toilet next to it, so the powder toilet can become the the disinfection area connected to the threshold. But ideally, yes, if a threshold is airtight, it's obviously better. But if it's not, then there are simple ways of controlling it, and creating a storage space for your shoes to be kept outside, creating a storage space there for materials that come in from outside with a little UV hammer light there or something like that. So you can manage it, in either of the ways shown in the presentation, and accomplish what we're talking about. But a little curtain or a partition or a screen would help a lot.
I would also be happy if you talk about the disinfection zone and how the guest room, like if we were talking about creation of the storage spaces. So if
Yeah.
you elaborate on that, I think that would also be great.
Yeah, we touched upon it in the presentation. So now it depends on layout of the existing space, because not everyone is shifting into a new house or building a new house. So if your existing space has a guest room which is near the entrance, then you can actually just make the space between the entrance and the guest room as a little threshold space, and use the guest room very, very effectively to as a flexible space, to because so you can have a storage there in which you can keep the anything that comes from outside, make sure put a little UV light there, disinfect it, use the washroom to wash things with soap water, etc. And if required in future, you can actually look at the guest room as an isolation space if that need arises. So there are a lot of flexible things that you can do with a guest room being near the entrance, if your existing house has that layout.
The next point is very, very different. It says, has the government released any norms which need to be adopted for residences?
So interesting. I mean, while the government has released a lot of advisories, and please, I must stress here, the government has not released any norms or bylaws. They are all advisories. So the advisories have come for workspaces, resident, industrial spaces, etc., etc. But there's no specific advisory for your house. So, the answer for that would be no. They've not talked about house residential spaces. But yes, when you talk about the common areas in a society, like the park, the gym, etc., etc., then there are norms which talk about social distancing happening, and inspections, making sure that the hygiene is maintained, the new hygiene is maintained, and that there is proper screening, etc., happening.
Right. So I think most other people are just complimenting on the presentation. Right. Nishant, I would also like you to touch upon the aspect of visual connectivity that we had talked about. So question to you would be that, do you think that the way we design residences is going to change now at all? And if yes, how?
No, it is, and I mean, we've shown a few layouts where we are already making changes to what we had proposed for buildings which are under construction, because and there are a lot of things that are going to impact it. Of course, thresholds is one, creating good thresholds. Uh, Two is the house is now a work center, so ensuring that a lot of workspaces. So if there is a household of 4 people, there should be 4 workspaces incorporated in the planning. And then if it's a housing society, or if it's or you're living in a little residential colony, then your balcony spaces become very important, because like we've just faced a lockdown, if there was a second wave of the pandemic, then there would be another lockdown, and suddenly for another 1.5, 2 months, we would not be able to use the common facilities in our colony or society. So how do we actually maintain visual or physical connection with our neighborhood? It's through our balconies, because that's the only avenue we have of connecting to people, of looking at people, and maybe saying a hello from a distance. And so yes, our the way we are designing residential spaces has undergone a change, and it will evolve as we we keep designing residential spaces.
Right. So I think questions that I have written here are done. Is there any point that you think you would want to add from the presentation? We have another few minutes to go.
Yeah, so I will, for me, the good part about residential spaces is that they are private spaces. They are spaces for only family and those 4 5 family members who inhabit this. So please don't go overboard with things done in your residence. Look, every one of you is living together. You are, as long as you are sort of creating a threshold which segregates your public-private space, ensures that your footwear, your goods, etc., that come in from outside, stay there. And please have empathy for your neighbors. If there is someone who is detected in your neighborhood as a potential contaminant, please have empathy to him. Ultimately, he is your neighbor. You've grown up together. So it's very important. I mean, the worst thing that can happen to us is that we become self-centered just because of this pandemic. We've always, I mean, India is a culture where we think about people, think about others. We always live live in harmony with each other. And this neighborhood feeling and neighborhood culture is very important and intrinsic to our lifestyle, and we must do all we can to preserve it. So that's why, we are talking about socially distanced community spaces. So let's not, get rid of our community spaces or community living or community habits. Let's keep them intact, but do them in a slightly different way. And I think that would be a very important point, something very important to point out. So yeah, Manu.
Thank you. I would like you to close the session now. Thank you for participating. Thanks from me. Nishant, would you like to add?
Yeah, so thanks a lot. Thank you for participating. We've had a lot of interesting discussions, and feel free to get in touch with us and write in your comments, feedback. As always, we'll be uploading the video of this presentation on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe and give us your feedback on that video or any other question that pops into your mind. Feel free to write to us. In this current series, the next presentation will be on next Saturday, which is the 30th of May, where we'll be talking about healthcare buildings. So please do join us for that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.
Nishant, you can close the meeting.